Thank you everyone for being here. Today in our IGUE talks, we have Cristina Branquinho. Cristina is a full professor of ecology at the Faculty of Science of the University of Lisboa, but is affiliated to the Center of Ecology, Evolution and Environmental Changes and the associated laboratory Change. Her research focuses on lichen ecology, environmental change, ecological indications, urban ecology, that's why she's here today, and dryland ecology. And she is known as especially for using lichens as biomonitors of the pollution and the nitrogen deposition. So thank you, Cristina, for being here today. We are really looking forward to see your presentation.
Okay, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me. I'm really honored to make this talk here. So I would like also to say that maybe today I will not show lichen data. Sorry about it. Anyway, I will try to share some of the data that we have where we look at how can we use the biodiversity to design cities, to tackle some of the environmental changes that we have. And so, of course, I would like also to highlight this work is from also by Felipe Grillo, Cristiana Aleixo, Bernardo Rocha, and Pedro Pinho. So it's a teamwork. So I will introduce a little bit something that is quite obvious, but that I think it's important to highlight because it's the most important driver we have, which is the population growth on Earth and the fact that we are moving to urban areas. So we already are more in urban areas than in rural areas. And the pressure of not only increasing the number of people, but also the impact that each of us has on resources, it's increasing. And of course, the Earth is a limited place. So I think one of the problems that we have is the lack of space on Earth to be able to deal with all the things that we produce. So an important figure, which it's quite common, but I think it's very striking, is that we replaced what we called, and this is just about mammals, right? This is just about mammals. Over time, I don't know if you see my mouse, but over time, yes. We replaced completely wild mammals with ourselves and with our livestock, where we just have mammals, not poultry included. So meaning that we are surrounded by us and by our livestock and pets. So it's not only about the human population, it's also about the other organisms that we promoted. Of course, this changed completely the surface of Earth, and this is where urban areas are in an extreme situation of the situation. So one of the things we changed is the land use. So we changed from forest, grasslands, to shrublands, to urban areas, to agriculture areas, and we did that on 1/3 of Earth. Then, if we look on the right graph, it's not only about the land use change, it's also about land management change. So, for example, when I change from a wild natural forest to a managed forest, for a forest of production, I'm still forest, but the way the forest is managed is completely different. So when we look at land use change and land management change, we changed the Earth on about 2/3 of our planet, which is really, really a lot. So that's why that biodiversity have been decreasing in the indicators such as Living Planet Index, and that's why, for example, biodiversity intactness index, like the one I'm showing here on the right, has also been changing a lot. So the integrity of ecosystems have been completely changed in most of the areas of Earth due to all this trouble. Another important issue we also address in terms of biodiversity, it's invasions. So we have invasions everywhere, especially where humans are, and the cost of it is quite important. And last but not the least, biodiversity homogenization, which is related not only with changes on topography. So, for example, in a rural area, completely making the soil straight, or, for example, planting genetic similar species, or, for example, because of the pollution, we have the atmosphere more rich in some elements, and so the species that dominate there are the ones that are able to deal with that pollution. The fact that we have invasive species and that they really, when they dominate, they become very similar. And of course, climate change that reduces the type of species that are allowed to live in certain places. So all these troubles, all these problems are really, are more dramatic in the urban area, where we replaced completely nature by human-made infrastructures. So we have increasing in population density and soil sealing. We reduce the number of species. We have more air pollution. We change the regulation flow. And so we have also fragmentation and completely disappearance of some natural habitats. We also have changes in macroclimatic conditions due to the replacement of vegetation. So urban areas are kind of a laboratory where humans really made a very important change, and where we can study, in fact, not only the consequences of change of replacing nature by human-made structures, but also how can we now go back. And that's because now that we destroyed most green spaces in urban areas, we want to restore that green infrastructure or using nature-based solutions. And of course, we want to do that because we know that those bring a lot of ecosystem services that are important for us and normally for free. So we want them because they support species and habitats, because they regulate temperature and water retention, and, for example, because they also mitigate air pollution, they promote pollination, or they can give us shade, food, and last but not least, recreational activities where everyone feels better when it's around these green infrastructures. So green spaces based on nature-based solutions are really important in urban areas. So I will address this talk now about case studies that we developed after this introduction, and I will focus on two topics: climate change and biodiversity itself. So how to deal with biodiversity in urban areas, and how can we have an ecological high on biodiversity in urban areas, and then problems related with climate change. So in the first case, I will show, now I'm showing the work of Filipe Grillo, the PhD work of Filipe Grillo, where in fact a initial framework was that we have to look at in urban areas in a socio-ecological framework based on functional diversity, so looking at traits. And the idea is that in urban areas, we have everything that reaches urban areas are normal species, invasive species, species that are brought by humans. So there's more diversity of traits that reach and genes that reach urban areas. So species that arrive at urban areas are a larger proportion than species that arrive in rural areas because of all the anthropogenic traits that are brought by human dispersion. And those are filtered, and that's what we want to understand. Those are filtered not only because of ecological reasons, so if they really are able to cope with drought or temperatures and so on, but they are also filtered by social drivers. So there's social filtering processes that we need to account when we look in an ecological perspective at urban areas. So this was a little bit what she did. And the representation is that, of course, we have, of course, natural dispersion, human dispersion. So we have then at the city level potential urban traits that are filtered. So those filtered traits will produce some socio-ecological outcomes that give us some ecological functions, that will produce some ecosystem services, and then that will feed back for human well-being. So this is the approach that we used in this work. And we started by looking at this socio-ecological system and look at different facets of biodiversity, like structure, abundance, taxonomic diversity, functional diversity, using both response traits and effect traits, depending on what we wanted to look, and at different scales. So at the city scale, at the parish scale, and at the local scale, okay, to understand how much those services were produced. So some of the results we got, for example, to Lisbon, this is Lisbon, this is the river, Tagus here, and this is the limit of Lisbon. So this is the most, for the people that don't know so much Lisbon, this is the historical part, okay? So the river is around, and the historical part of Lisbon is centered here. So what we found when we projected a lot of indices of biodiversity in urban areas at the parish scale, we found that older parts of the city had more abundance, species richness, evenness, and also replacement of species, functional divergence, and functional evenness. So the central parts of Lisbon, probably mostly due to cumulative behavior or cumulative entrance of species, had highest levels of diversity. And the new part of the city, the newest parts of the cities were less diverse, which is something we need really to look, because they apparently people are planting in a very homogeneous way. I must say that I forgot to tell you, this is about only street trees, okay? It is not about parks. This is about street trees. And it's not related to the parks itself. When we went to a more local scale, the scale of the quarter, the scale of the street, what we found is that there more variance. So in some areas, it seems that only a few people can really benefit from the existence of trees, and we saw a similar pattern that, you know, abundance, richness, evenness, and so on, was richer in the more downtown areas of the city. So, but and this highlights two things. Again, old areas, because of the historical phases, they have more diversity due to the cumulative behavior of people and the different trends over time. Whereas in the younger parts of the city and the newest parts of the city, we get some homogeneous behavior in relation to planting some street trees. And we really need maybe to change that, because it's getting very homogeneous. In another way, it's very important to know that we need to make precision management in what relates these ideas. So I think that getting this type of maps, it's important for the planners to understand where they can increase diversity, where they can put more trees, because it's very, not everybody has access to street trees in their areas. So we also related these indices with a bunch of variables with different natures, some more social and some more ecological. And it was very interesting and striking that both abundance, species richness, Shannon index, evenness, functional divergence, and functional evenness were mostly related with social variables and drivers, both at the parish and at the block level. Only abundance seemed to be related with some ecological variables, such as type of soil and land surface temperature. But it's very interesting that it's more, so most of the indicator, this diversity indicators were really explained by social variables, such as the building's area, the number of public elements, type of families, the type of construction, the presence of roads. So there was a lot of about social. We're very surprised by that. Well, maybe surprised, but in fact, in cities, the dominance of humans makes this work in this way. We also looked at the species because our idea is that maybe we can look at species not by the species name, but by the role that they have and the ecosystem services they provide. And so if we make a cluster analysis of the traits that are available in Lisbon, looking at the most dominant species, and we did that. So we did a cluster analysis on the most important and the most dominant species that occurred in Lisbon in street trees. And we found mostly 3 functional groups. And we interpret these functional groups as one. We call it temperate functional group because most species were from temperate climates with rapid growth, short lifespan, at low tolerance to droughts. Then we find tropical functional group, mostly related with some exotic species from tropical climates with large leaves and flowers, and that might tolerate some pests and shade. And then finally, the obvious group, which is the Mediterranean functional group, with, of course, native species, very resistant to tolerate drought and wind and so on. And it was interesting to find these 3 groups. We think that both temperate functional group and tropical functional groups are not very adapted to these conditions. And so they probably are more sensitive to environmental changes that occur at this level. And we expect that those types of species are the ones that get more diseases, more pests, and so on. And so that they might suffer from even more climate change situation, or more extreme climate change situation than we already have now. So if we plot these functional groups that, these type of functional groups in Lisbon, it's very interesting because we found that this is the temperate functional group, which is across all the city. This is the tropical functional group, again on downtown as the temperate, and this is the Mediterranean functional group that you see more widespread in the outskirts of the city. And when we plotted the dominant functional group at each block, we see the dominance of temperate species more than, for example, Mediterranean species. So clearly here there's a mismatch between what the climate says and what the trees that are there. I think this is also an important issue for planning and for future planning of the city. We also related these functional groups with asking, what are the drivers that explain the presence of these functional groups. And as in the case of the other indicators, the biodiversity indicators that we showed previously, again, a lot of social variables such as roads, public elements, commercial services related, for example, were present as walking potential, were present in explaining the distribution of these functional groups in the city. In the case of Mediterranean areas, it is very interesting to understand that they are located in areas with at least some land surface temperature and some urbanization index. Despite this, so some of the variables are here described. And for example, those tropical species are more related in areas with low vegetation, low NDVI, so less vegetation around, and walking potential, more walking potential. So there was differences in the way they were explained, but again, important social drivers determining where they are located. And this is the main take-home message I would like to show. So when we look at species at the city level in an ecological perspective, we need to account for much more variables and other types of things that we are used to do when we just work on more natural or rural areas. I have another case study here to show a little bit what we did in another city. So Lisbon is here, and the city, a bridge that you cross to the other side is called Almada. So Almada is not so urbanized as Lisbon. As you can see here, there's a lot of green spaces yet, some forest fragments. So we wanted to understand, and we here focus not on the city itself, on the urbanized part of the city itself, but on the fragments of forest, and to understand what still they can conserve and how much connectivity we need to connect those forest fragments. Okay, so because we wanted to increase connectivity and for increasing resilience in the case of the city. This was work that was asked by the municipality. So what we did was a sampling design where we random stratified forests, having in mind the location and the size of the fragment. After this, we sampled in the centroid of the forest, assuming that the centroid is the most far away from urban areas and it's the better place in the forest. So we just sampled the centroid, and in the centroid, we sampled different taxa. So we wanted to look at these sites to fragments by looking at different aspects of the diversity, how different taxonomic groups would look like. And lichens finally here, they appear here. So we look at lichens, butterflies, other invertebrates, birds, and mammals. And we then looked for each taxa itself, and we did multivariate analysis for each taxa, and we tried to find in each taxa where was the axis of the urban variable related with urban variables. And we then did multivariate analysis with the different axes, with the different gradients that we extracted from each taxa. Okay, so in this type of analysis where we put all the multivariate analysis of the previous taxa, we found a gradient, what we called a urban index gradient, where we had a forest gradient. We have the highest number of mammals, lichens, and birds. Then butterflies and other invertebrates were not really explaining this urban index. Then we wanted really to model this in order to understand how can we project this type of thing. So we went to variables that were there, like land use, NDVI, fragmentation measures, potential soil radiation, distance to the sea. So we used a lot of variables to try to model this gradient of urban to forest. And we found that three important variables explaining this that we then did a model. Here you can have the representation of each one to understand. So in this case, of course, the urban area, so decreasing urban area increased very much the type of biodiversity related with forests, okay? Increasing very much the density of the vegetation increased very much the type of diversity related with forests. And of course, increasing very much the forest area as well, increased the type of diversity related with forest. We also found, interestingly here, a kind of point, which is about 4 hectares, because this is in a log axis, so don't look at this number. So 4 hectares, with 4 hectares, we guaranteed that we had forest diversity more than urban diversity. So urban types of diversity. So with the fragments with more than 4 hectares, in the centroid, we were sure that we could have some forest species there of birds, lichens, mammals, and so on. So this allows us to replace all the places here on the right and look at the potential of biodiversity by looking at the potential of the forest fragments we had. Of course, this is an extrapolation for all the territory, and it was just for planning how we could do increased connectivity. So in some of the areas here, and I must move here, so in some of the areas, as you can see that there's no connectivity between elements. And one of the things that the municipality did with this work was increasing, for example, connectivity using streams, for example, for increasing connectivity, such as this is an important park in this village. And for example, with no connectivity with other green areas. And so some of those things like here and here, they were planning and then using streams, for example, restoring some streams in order to increase connectivity in urban areas in this area. So this work allowed us to show a little bit how to design biodiversity in order to increase connectivity between species. So I'm moving now to the last part of the presentation, where we tackled with climate change. And climate change in the sense that, of course, urban areas are already an important and extreme laboratory of climate change, not only because climate change is everywhere, but it is exacerbated by the heat, the urban heat island, because the replacement of vegetation by all these artificial materials led to the increase of temperatures in urban areas, and they can vary from 2 to 8 degrees. And they absorb and remit the sun heat more than natural surfaces. And this is an example of how we can look at surface temperature and air temperature relating to the variable that we are using. So what we used in this work was the land surface temperature as a proxy of the air temperature. We know that they vary very much with the materials, but we wanted to describe especially the type, what was the best type of vegetation that we could use in parks to reduce the effect of heat island effect. So using this nature-based solution. So what type of species and what is the design? So we did this at metropolitan area, municipal area, and at the park level, okay? We did by looking at land surface temperature, but we also did by using some sensors where we put in some gardens where we observed simultaneously the air temperature and the land surface temperature of the areas. So this is a map of the Lisbon metropolitan area. This map of Lisbon metropolitan area has 15 summer images of land surface temperature from July 2014 to August 2021. So it's an average of the most heat period in this area. And as you can see, there's quite a difference between, there's a very high variance in the land surface temperature here. And if you look at the image in this way, we can see some details. For example, this is a urban park in Lisbon, Monsanto, and this is Sintra Mountain. And of course, this is Serra da Rábida Natural Park. And this is the part that I was telling you about in Almada city as well. So you can see, and those are very agriculture sites. This is the airport of Lisbon, and this is, for example, let's say naked soil areas at the moment. So you can see that there's a lot of variance on land surface temperature and the average of land surface temperature in an metropolitan area. But when we model it using XGBoost, we found that the presence of vegetation was the most important variable explaining this difference that we observed, together with surface winds and elevation, because we are at the macro scale. But most important variable explaining it was the amount of vegetation. We also looked at the municipal area, because this is important, it's where decisions are taken place. And we look in this case to three municipalities, Lisbon, Almada, and Cascais. I can show here, so Lisbon, Almada here, and then Cascais, okay? So, and those are the land surface temperatures, those are the land use, and this is, let's say, the amount of the type of land use that they have. As you can see in some areas, it's very clear that when you have vegetation, you have decrease in temperatures because you have the buffering of this vegetation. And when we were trying to explain what are the drivers, the most important drivers explaining the three municipalities, we found that in all of them, So the moisture index, the amount of vegetation, was one of the most important variables, together with, in some cases, distance to the coast, in these cases, because that's relevant, as you know, and also interesting variables such as the amount of light in the night. So we also used, as a proxy of the intensity of the use of the land use, the amount of lights in the night, because this means more human activity. And so in some cases, the amount of light was also involved. And in some other cases, there was also some variables of climate. But mostly, it's the vegetation that makes the difference. Okay, so at the municipal level, the way we can recommend people to design the cities is, of course, to put as much vegetation as possible everywhere. We also went to another scale, which is the scale of the parks. So the scale of the parks is the scale of the design, landscape design sometimes. So we compared different parks, some more very dense, some almost without any vegetation, some that were irrigated, some others that were not irrigated, and in the different municipalities. Okay, so we also did some temperature measurements on those case studies to compare. And I will start by our champion park, which is Jardim da Estrela in Lisbon area. So as you can see, it's a very dense garden with evergreen, coniferous, deciduous trees, and so a very diverse number of trees. It's a very old garden. And so if you can look to the land surface temperature, you can see that land surface temperature is it's much smaller, close to the centroid of the park. When we compare these with sensors, this is, by the way, this is another image. This is coming from the outside of the park, and this is when we get into the park. And as you can see, this is the temperature. This is 35 degrees. This is land surface temperature. And as we go into the park, you can see the difference, the amplitude of the difference of the temperature between the outside of the park and the inside of the park. In this case, it's a large amount of temperature. It's almost, it's a large amount of degrees here. And when we did this measurement with the sensors, we found that, for example, so this park can decrease the temperature in 5 degrees in the most hot days. So when the days are between 25 and 30 degrees, there's a decrease in 5 degrees in the center of the park. And there's also an increase in relative humidity. So the park here, it's really, the park, as you see, it's really striking. This is the park that had the most striking differences between the outside and inside. We can discuss this later, but I think that this is a very, in a urban area, so Lisbon, urban area, an old place. But at the same time, this park is very old. The trees are very high. So the complexity of the structure, it's very high. And we think that this might be related with the fact that they really regulate so much temperature in the city. Okay. This is a different type of garden. This is grasslands here. And this is like the topography is a little bit different. So it's a topography is like a valley. One part of it is with more trees and in a shadow place, so you have less temperature. The other part of the garden is more exposed to the sun. So topography is also a relevant issue here. And in fact, the green park has a difference between outside and inside, but not so much as we could see in the previous park. And also this park showed that topography is also relevant, okay? Here, it's another park where there's a few irrigation, so only irrigation in those areas where its temperature is more regulated. But in another parts of the garden, it's not irrigated. So we have some sparse trees. And as you can see, the differences we got, it's not more than 1 degree. And it's almost, you don't see almost a difference with land surface temperature when you go into the park. So another example of a pine trees, so pine trees in a very dense way. This is another garden. Again, it seems that there's a big difference in temperature. And in fact, we could see, so this the density of vegetation and the fact that it's coniferous tree with needles that cover a large part of the soil makes a substantial decrease in the temperature, in the land surface temperature, as well on the air temperature. This is one big park with a lot of different things. So one of the parks that I told you in Almada, so we have a lake, pine trees, montado systems, like there has a fragment of old forest there, oak forest, a grassland and so on. So it's a very diverse park with different types of structures. You see that there are two hot spots where the temperature seems to be decreased in the forests, in the old forests, and again, when water is close, which makes sense. And in fact, we were expecting that this park could reduce the temperature, and in fact reduce the temperature, but not so much as the other I told you in Lisbon. And we think that maybe the urbanization around this park is not so high, and also the diversity of structures don't allow this decrease in temperature. And this is another example where we had, as you can see, there's only irrigation here. This is just a few trees, very young, still very young trees. And as you can see in the surroundings, there's a lot of vegetation. So when we look to the park, we just see a reduced in temperature here. And in fact, there's a apparent increase of temperature when we go into the park, because, you know, probably there's more vegetation or older vegetation in the surrounding areas. So just saying that not all the parks are the same. So the type of vegetation, the way the vegetation is dispersed, the type of leaves that exist will change the vegetation. And also maybe the vertical structure of the vegetation is also important. So we cannot design resilient cities if we design against nature. We must design with it. That's a little bit of a conclusion. I'm available to your questions. I just want to highlight that we will have, and invite you, all of you, to the Society of Ecological Restoration Conference in 2027 between August and September, where we can have, of course, urban issues and urban topics here. So it will be running in Lisbon, and we will would like very much to invite all of you to this conference. And just to tell you that we are building an atlas of different ecosystems, of course, and urban areas are novel ecosystems. And this is an example of like a representation of what type of diversity we can find in urban areas, and how we can find some niches to protect some species with interest for conservation. Just, of course, say obrigado or gracias to my colleagues that support this work, and I'm available to your questions.
Thank you, Cristina. Super good, super complete presentation. I really like. It was also beautiful, the slides and everything. It was, I really like it. And I was missing some plants in the seminars, because we had a lot of butterflies, birds, and so on, but not so many trees. And I think
just a few lichens. Just a few lichens.
yeah, it's true. Well, we have lichens some weeks ago, so
yeah.
It's okay. It's okay. Great. So I will open the questions round, and I will start because people used to be shy. So, okay, yeah. One of the first results was about the age of the city and the part of the city, and how this regulates the functional diversity of the trees, no? And you were saying something like that in central areas. Well, maybe in the past, people, the managers planted several trees, and now there is less diversity. But what about the perturbation per se of building a new area? So when you build a new area, you destroy what was there, you change the land cover, and maybe this also change the soil conditions and the pollinators and all the ecosystem. And this ecosystem needs to be constructed again. And maybe this is explaining why you find lower functional diversity, for example, in those surrounded parts of Lisbon that are more new.
No, well, I'm not sure if I understood your question, but I'll try to see if I'm going there. Otherwise, you correct me. So what we found is higher. We are comparing street trees, not really forest ecosystems in this case. So we are not comparing gardens or even the Monsanto area where we have a lot of diversity, I'm sure, but we are comparing just the role of street trees and how street trees can introduce, more diversity, because they, of course, they are also habitat places. No, of course, if we have more diverse trees in street trees, we can have, of course, other species that can also then interact with those trees. So this is just street trees, okay? The diversity of street trees. And what we found is that in historical parts of the city, we have more diversity in all types of indicators, okay? Yeah. Even functional diversity. And when in the more new areas, in the new constructions, presently, and we don't know the before because we are not, we didn't do rural areas that still can exist in some parts. We just did street trees, but in the more newer areas, we have less diversity. And our interpretation is a little bit like, so historical areas of the city have been, let's say, so who decides what types of trees are going? It's more landscape architects. And this, I think, is a little bit like trends. So there's a trend of putting some type of tree, and then this trend is very homogeneous over time. And if you just get a lot of time, you get different trends. So you can accumulate different types of trees, and then you can increase diversity by historically having different trends that different people bring. So as you saw, this is social decision. It's a social decision because most decisions are based on social drivers. And of course, the decision is on landscape architects that decide what type of trees they are there. And normally they do it in a visual and let's say, how can I say, more to attract people than to increase diversity. So, but the fact that we have different trends in historical gardens and that different historical fashions, let's say, I think we have more cumulative diversity than on new areas, because people decide on new areas to put 1 or 2 species everywhere, and then it's very poor. It's very poor. This is something we can change, because, this type of species, as I said, they are not adapted to this climate. So they are very sensitive. Then 70% of some of the urban trees have diseases and pests. So it's a lot of money that people use to deal with those type of trees. That is where that people deal with it every day. So I would say that we need to change the way people look at this design. I think design could still be attractive, but could include some diversity itself in the projects, not having just reduced number of species or having just one species on when you do just a plant project. And this is what happened in the new parts of the city.
Okay.
Did I answer to your question?
Yeah. Yes. So basically are planted trees, not like natural trees that appear.
No, this is just planted trees. This is the trees that most of the people that live in cities relate with. Okay, they are. We don't look at this type of things in an ecological perspective, and we try to do that. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. I have a quick question, and then I will let everyone else to have some questions. One of the main results of the second paper or third paper was about the temperature and the remote sensing measured temperature. And I don't really know how you put the formulas and everything, but I'm not sure about how this indicator of temperature, of surface temperature, can be separated from NDVI, because in the formula there was a lot of NDVI formulas. I didn't get it, but because some of the results were quite correlated with the NDVI, and I don't know if you can give a sort of explanation of how this land surface metric with variable sensing is working. And
yeah, it's not completely separated because the presence of water, of course, reduces the temperature in the vegetation.
yeah.
But yes, but it can be so land surface temperature can be very different from materials to materials. Okay, so we are speaking about vegetation, but we also get here roads, soil, naked soil. So the land surface that we are seeing is not only water related. We also have surface materials that are observed. Of course, for the calculation of this type of thing, you can also include it, but you can separate it from the NDVI. It's not totally correlated. So the most important variables for us were always the presence of vegetation, except when we go to the local scale, and it's the type of vegetation. But I think this would be expected, because when you are describing a model where you have roads, houses, lakes, a lot of things, the vegetation and the water, in the presence of water, are the ones that better reduce the temperature. And I think that's very obvious. Then when you go to the park, it's not only the amount of vegetation, it's the type of vegetation, together with topographical variables, and together with, of course, some other type of variables locally speaking. But the type of vegetation is important at the garden, at the park level. Okay.
Okay.
So I think it's separated.
I will let the people, if you want to have any questions, you have the time now. Marina?
Hi. Thank you so much for your amazing talk. I have a question about how do you define urban and non-urban areas in your studies? Do you use building cover or population density, green areas, or a combination of different things? Yeah.
We didn't define it, to be honest. So in Lisbon area, we didn't define urban. So Lisbon area, we considered completely the all municipality. We didn't define the urban part. So in the municipality, we did the street trees. So, and the information is available to everybody. So is a data set is available, and we just used the street trees. So we didn't really. We didn't classify. What we used as proxies of urbanization is density of people, number of roads, number of buildings, number of lights, everything, noise, everything. We just put it 20, 100 variables, 200 variables. So only few appeared, but we used as much as possible variables that could describe urbanization. And this thing that I would like to highlight is that the lights in the night, have a very high spatial resolution, appeared very often, because it's not only the density of people that is related, it's also the intensity of the use that people does to those places. And then it's a very, very nice variable to, that the night lights variable is related with the GDP, the global GDP. So that's the important paper that was published, and and so it's not, that doesn't mean that at the city level can mean the GDP, but it means the intensity of the use of the land. And so it's a very nice variable that I recommend everyone to include, because it has a very high spatial resolution, and it can really give not only, it even can separate poor neighbors from rich neighbors, because you have the same amount of people, but maybe the use of light can really mean the intensity of the use of resources by people. So how much they, so yeah, that appeared a lot as not density of people didn't appear, the number of buildings appeared, and also the lights, so appeared a lot.
Okay, thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for your questions and answer and everything. I don't know if you have time for more questions because it's almost 5:30.
I'm okay.
Joan, you have anything to add?
I had like a very brief question about the urban forest of Lisbon, because I mean, like, I guess the same problems as in Barcelona. Do you have problems with the trees producing a lot of volatile compounds like methane and so that provide these services to people? Or that like decline air quality? Sorry, I don't know if I'm too far
I don't
away.
know. I
Okay.
don't know. I don't know. That's an important issue. Yes, we know that, for example, in some parts of the country, we know that there's a lot of volatile compounds that have been emitted and are related with ozone and so on. But at the city level, I don't know. So I know that some areas, for example, in the north eastern part of the country, there's a lot of, for example, of volatile organic compounds that have been in fact used. But I don't know very much about this in city. So I don't know what happens in Barcelona, but it would be very nice also to do something similar. But yes, I don't know how much these volatile organic compounds are being emitted by vegetation. Sorry about it.
Okay, so I think we can finish here. Let you rest because you have been traveling all day and tomorrow you have to teach. Okay, so thank you a lot for giving this awesome seminar. This will be online. Well, you know already, but this will be online in YouTube. So, and this is the last seminar of this year, of this calendar year, well, this season year, until September, October. We are very happy with all the presentation. We have 8 seminars of different topics, and we will get back in September with new topics, new people. And I hope, Cristina, you can join us again as a attendant, not as a presenter. And we learn from each other, and we grow as a community. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much for inviting me, and it's an honor to be part of it. This stuff.
Thanks for coming.
Okay, so I finished the presentation. Yeah.